Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It is November 17th, 2020, and you are now watching Real Talk with Ronnie's presidential race post analysis and reaction segment. So, welcome back to our show. It's been exactly 2 weeks since the 2020 presidential race, and the mainstream media has declared that former Vice President Joe Biden has won the presidential race with a record breaking 78 million popular votes. That's right. You heard correctly. Joe Biden, a guy who barely registered at 1% in the 2008 Democratic primaries before dropping out, a guy who could barely draw crowds of 30 people to any one of his campaign rallies, a guy who essentially waited out this campaign in his basement. Yes, that Joe Biden has somehow amassed more votes than any presidential candidate in the history of the United States. And let's put this into perspective. According to the current figures, Biden has captured a whopping 9 million votes more than Barack Obama did in 2008 when he electrified America and the world by becoming the nation's first black president. Wow, who would have thought that Joe Biden from electorally insignificant Delaware was such a hit? Well, if you're scratching your head right now, then guess what? You're not alone because the over 73 million legitimate voters who casted their ballots for President Trump have been doing the same thing for nearly 2 weeks now. If you had told me this was the outcome a week ago, I would have soundly called your BS and had a hearty laugh. In fact, I would have confidently said that not in a million moons and 10 trillion suns would something like this ever happen. But guess what? The unthinkable has happened. This is the reality that is being forced down our throats as we speak, or actually, more accurately, this is the quote unquote reality that is being peddled by nearly every mainstream media outlet in America today. We are told to believe that despite the tens of thousands of Trump supporters that pack every one of his overflow rallies, that despite the genuine, enthusiastic, and organic explosion of Trump supporters from every walk of life and from every race, creed, and religion that have sprung up in this country, that despite all this, and despite the fact that a million people showed up for the Million MAGA rally in DC just a couple of days ago, that in the end, it was still no match for Joseph R. Biden Jr. Now, he must be the reincarnate of George Washington, Abe Lincoln, Gandhi, MLK, the Jonas Brothers, every single Kennedy, and Jesus all rolled into one then. Now, let's consider this other figure. Last week, President Trump increased his vote total from his 2016 win by a staggering 10 million votes. In other words, 10 million more people voted for President Trump in 2020 than in 2016. Now, in any normal, sane world where the laws of physics apply, when 10 million more votes are added to your column, that usually indicates a landslide for that candidate, right? But nope, not in America. Here, we are forced to believe that despite this tremendous and historic support and turnout for the incumbent president, the buck stops at Joe Biden. Here's another point that seems to fly in the face of reason and logic. With Joe Biden's apparent colossal 78 million votes, 78 million, where was this so called blue wave that was supposed to sweep the nation, right? And it was supposed to deliver the Senate to the Democrats. It was supposed to flip upwards of 15 House seats for Nancy Pelosi. Where was this wave? After all, Joe Biden's dominance at the top of the ticket surely would have helped down ballot candidates across the country, right? I mean, that's the only logical thing to take out of this. However, curiously enough, it didn't. In fact, currently, Republicans have held on to all their House seats and even managed to flip at least 7 seats, and the GOP is now in a solid position to take over the House, or actually to retake the House in 2022. Furthermore, the US Senate is projected to remain in GOP hands. So, given this inconsistent election outcome, it has been hard for Trump's 73 million legitimate voters to reconcile how in the world Republicans all across the country did so well, but then somehow Biden claims the top prize. Now, not too surprisingly, the mainstream media has been doing its dutiful and biased job of projecting the winner of this race and has been trying their hardest to hurry along this process and put a lid on this election, despite a mountain of evidence that fraud was rife in many battleground states. Last Saturday, most of the networks called the election for Joe Biden when he notched supposed wins in Pennsylvania and Nevada. But just so everyone is clear, in this country, in America, the networks do not have the authority to call elections, and their projections are just that, projections. In fact, CNN's projection is no more authoritative or conclusive than my projections. The only projections and calls that matter are those that come from each individual state. In this country, according to our Constitution, states award the electors and states certify the race. Only when that happens is any presidential race final and conclusive. That's right, folks. It's actually that simple. And anyone who tells you otherwise is either willfully lying or doesn't understand the American electoral process. Oh, and by the way, as I'm speaking to you right now, Facebook has already decided to strip President Trump of his title. On the social media site, he is now listed as simply a political candidate. So, back to that widespread voter fraud claim that has been front and center in the Trump campaign's legal fight. Now, virtually every single mainstream media outlet has been parroting the same rehearsed and coordinated response, and that is that, there's no evidence of widespread fraud. In a way, I would expect them to say that. After all, why would an institution that has been so blatantly anti-Trump, for the past 4 years, now all of a sudden throw Trump a bone? Remember, this is the same institution that effectively protected Joe Biden throughout the campaign and blacked out any reporting of the Hunter Biden scandal. This is the same institution that routinely edits Trump sound bites to make him sound like a racist. This is the same institution that has falsely claimed Trump's non disavowal of white supremacy when actually, in fact, Trump has repeatedly disavowed any such hate filled groups every chance he gets. But now the media is insisting that there was no fraud and Americans are just supposed to take their word for it. It's quite interesting to see the mainstream media's sudden infatuation with the word evidence. Now, if you remember, where was all this interest in evidence when they themselves were actively pursuing the Russian collusion narrative for the past 4 years? Without any shred of evidence whatsoever, the Democrats, media, and tech giants relentlessly pushed this Russian collusion scandal, which ultimately turned out to be exactly what it was. It was a fabricated hoax made up for sinister political purposes with no shred of, wait for it, evidence. All right, guys. So, first of all, just because the media says something is not evidence does not mean it's not evidence. There have been over 200 pages of sworn affidavits alleging voting irregularities. This literally is evidence in support of voter fraud. Pennsylvania's Allegheny County received a mail in ballot for Denise Ondick, despite the fact that Ms. Ondick passed away even before receiving a ballot. This literally is evidence of voter fraud. In Macomb County, Michigan, absentee votes of dead people were counted. This literally is evidence of voter fraud, or at the very least, a high degree of negligent conduct on the part of somebody. In Pennsylvania, it was discovered that over 21,000 dead people were still on the voter rolls. Now, there was an initial story that these 21,000 dead people all voted for Biden, but then the good old New York Times published a story that seemed to put this rumor to rest. No, 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 says the New York Times. Stop being foolish. 21,000 people, or rather, 21,000 dead people did not vote for Biden. Of course not. All that happened here was that these 21,000 dead people were still on the voter rolls. So instead, they were also sent mail in ballots. That's all that happened. Okay, great. But what happened to those 21,000 extra mail in ballots? Nobody knows. And that's why this whole mail in ballot business has been such a disaster. For all we know, those 21,000 extra mail in ballots could have been filled in as Biden votes by somebody and counted in Biden's column. Now, this is an important fact that we have to remember, folks. This has been the first time in American history that millions upon millions of mail in ballots have been sent out unscrupulously under the guise of public safety in the time of COVID 19. And there has simply been no way to conduct proper oversight on how these mail in ballots are handled. And this is but one example that we actually know of. There have been numerous other cases of dead people remaining on voter rolls in countless other battleground states. And when Joe Biden's supposed margins of victory in these states are razor thin, then guess what? Dead people remaining on voter rolls becomes a critical issue. Furthermore, there have been reports of pallets of mail in ballots coming in the dead of night that, fantastically enough, all go for Joe Biden. That's right, 100% all going for Joe Biden. That's a statistical impossibility, but once again, we're supposed to swallow that down as truth, as unquestionable truth. In Michigan and Pennsylvania, Republican poll watchers and observers were denied entry into the convention halls where the votes were being counted. There's literally evidence, video evidence of this. In fact, Pennsylvania election officials very brazenly defied a judge's order that was passed down that very same day when they denied members of Trump's campaign team meaningful access to observe the vote counting. But of course, once again, we are told that there is no evidence of widespread fraud. Ladies and gentlemen, the truth of the matter is that there are countless examples and evidence of voter fraud and voting irregularities during this election. And all you really have to do is just Google it. Moreover, even if something isn't direct evidence, there sure as hell is enough circumstantial evidence. And when this combination of direct evidence and circumstantial evidence is taken in its totality, there's most certainly a very strong case to be made for widespread voter fraud in this election. In that same vein, there has also been a lot of chatter about, much of the evidence being hearsay, and therefore, it's not really evidence at all. Well, to anyone who's ever been through law school, the memory of sitting through mandatory evidence class is, for better or worse, permanently etched into the minds of many lawyers and legal professionals. As one of those individuals who sat through evidence class, I can tell you that the concept of hearsay is actually pretty straightforward. Any lawyer or 3L law student can probably recite the definition in their sleep. Hearsay, after all, is an out of court statement offered in court to prove the truth of the matter asserted. That's the definition. It's that easy. Now, any lawyer or 3L law student could also tell you that perhaps only 5% of the time in evidence class is spent learning the concept of hearsay. The other 95% of the time is spent learning and memorizing the exceptions to the hearsay rule. As such, just because the media tells you that a certain piece of evidence is hearsay and thus not admissible evidence, you shouldn't take that legal commentary to the bank. Remember, there are many exceptions to the hearsay rule, which would make an otherwise inadmissible statement admissible. All right, now let's just pretend for a moment that I did not say everything that I just said. Let's pretend that dead people didn't vote for Biden. Let's pretend that pallets of ballots did not magically turn up and unanimously go for Biden. Let's also pretend that there were no voting irregularities whatsoever or improprieties in this entire voting process. Okay, now allow me to introduce Dominion voting systems. This is a company, actually a Canadian company, whose electronic voting hardware and software were extensively used in a number of the swing states this year, such as Michigan and Georgia. Interestingly enough, the state of Texas declined to use Dominion due to potential security risks. In any case, Dominion was responsible for initially awarding 6,000 Trump votes to Biden in the state of Michigan due to a quote unquote glitch in the software. Now, this quote unquote glitch was later attributed to quote unquote human error. That's right, folks. Just like that, election fraud has become nothing more than oops, a meaningless little accident by someone who just didn't get enough sleep. However, this minor 6,000 vote switch up fiasco is just the tip of the iceberg. According to a report by One American News Network, Dominion is responsible for deleting 2.7 million Trump votes nationwide. In fact, in Pennsylvania alone, data analysis found that 221,000 votes for President Trump were inexplicably switched to Biden. Now, this is particularly troublesome given the fact that Biden supposedly leads Trump in the Keystone State by only 69,000 votes. In all, states that ultimately used Dominion voting systems switched 435,000 votes from President Trump to Joe Biden. That's nearly 500,000 votes. Now, very recently, USA Today published a piece where it seemingly debunked these claims regarding this company, right? Dominion. And according to their fact check, quote unquote fact check, this allegation about Dominion was flat out false. Okay, great. So now we have a fact checker and they say it's false. Well, that's good, right? Until you hear about this. Now, what was the basis or the evidence behind their fact check? Well, according to USA Today, this story is false. Why? Because Dominion released a statement saying it's false. Okay, so it's false because Dominion says it's false, therefore it must be false. All right. So once again, just like that, we're supposed to take the media's word for it. Now, does that sound like a reassuring argument in defense of Dominion for the 73 million legitimate voters who lawfully voted for President Trump? Now, I think I can confidently speak for the 73 million people when I say that the answer is a big resounding no. Now, to make the swamp even swampier, if that's even possible, the owners and investors of Dominion have ties to prominent Democrats and even made contributions to the Clinton Foundation. Oh, and the cherry on the cake? A former top aide to Nancy Pelosi is one of the company's lobbyists. Isn't that grand? Ladies and gentlemen, this is America. And one of America's most unique selling points, and perhaps one of our greatest attributes, is our fair and free elections. America is, after all, the bastion of democracy and the envy of the world. But this election threatens to undermine and jeopardize everything America stands for. Our reputation and legitimacy is literally on the line. To the 73 million legitimate voters who exercised their constitutional rights, this pathetic excuse of a fair electoral outcome reeks of deceit, and instead of putting the fix in the system, we need to fix the system once and for all. For months and months, Democrats have put the fear of Jesus in Americans over large gatherings due to the coronavirus. But wasn't it amazing how Democrats suddenly stopped admonishing and started celebrating in large crowds once the mainstream media outlets started projecting victory for Joe Biden? Their silence undermines their entire rationale for mail in votes. But actually, anybody with an ounce of common sense could have seen this coming a mile away. Democrats have been using COVID 19 as a convenient excuse to expand mail in balloting. Plain and simple. This election saw a record 100 million early votes cast, and with no sound structural apparatus in place to safeguard and provide oversight regarding mail in ballots, this election became a free for all. Free to cheat, free to steal, and free to sully the very foundations of our republic. During Joe Biden and Kamala Harris's self-proclaimed victory speeches, Harris exuberantly stated that American voters chose, quote unquote, hope, unity, decency, and yes, truth. Now, I actually find nearly all her choice of words to be quite amusing and painstakingly ironic. She uses the word chose, but it's becoming increasingly clear that millions of voters didn't actually have a choice. She speaks of hope, but where was this hope during the past 4 years when all Democrats wanted to do was obstruct and impeach? She speaks of unity, but where was the unity when it came to BLM and Antifa?
I do actually somewhere around here.
Stop Trump! Stop Trump! Stop Trump! Stop Trump! Stop Trump on his musty ass, ugly ass, fucking fucking ass supporters! Why are you breaking ass bitches?
Throw that shit back on there. Throw that shit. Don't smother it. Somebody blow on it, bro. It needs oxygen. That shit's not flammable, bro. Yeah, it is. Isopropyl alcohol. 99%. The 99%. I heard that one in a hot minute. There you go. This is technically a Trump fan. Up there. Fuck Trump! We don't do what he wants! Oh my God!
She speaks of decency, but where was the decency when Joe Biden told the President of the United States to shut up during a national debate? Finally, she speaks of truth. Where was the truth when it came to Hunter Biden and his foreign business dealings that involved his father, also known as the big guy? The main point to take away is this, and this is something that everybody, especially those in the mainstream media, need to understand and remember. President Donald J. Trump is still the president of the United States. And that is the one true fact that the Democrats, the media, and big tech are trying to conceal, scrub out, and paint over. President Trump still has a number of legal options, with the US Supreme Court being perhaps the final arbiter in the ultimate outcome of this race. There is no denying the fact that Democrats and Team Biden are in an enviable position right now. After all, they may have pulled off the greatest heist this country has ever seen by quote unquote winning the battle of 2020. However, whether Democrats can ultimately win the war is still something that remains to be seen. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for watching Real Talk with Ronnie, and please remember to join me next time as we continue to explore the aftermath of this 2020 selection. That's right, I said selection, not election. Okay, everybody, God bless and peace out.